This video is about the Olivet Discourse, a prophecy and parables given by Jesus in approximately 30 AD. Now, there's more detail in my new book, God, Mind, Body, available now to read free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled Ensor, or you can buy it from Amazon as a paperback or an ebook. And there'll be links in the description below. So, the prelude to the Olivet Discourse came when Jesus and his disciples were looking at the temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus said, "Most certainly I tell you, there will not be left one stone on another that will not be thrown down." That's Matthew 24, verse 2. And this was clearly foretelling the destruction of the temple by the Romans 40 or so years later. So that's the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So then Christ proceeded to the top of the Mount of Olives, where the disciples said, "Tell us, when will these things be? What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" That's Matthew 24, verse 3. The question suggests that the disciples associated the aforementioned destruction of the temple with the end times, doubtless because of Daniel's prophecies about an abomination of desolation. So the first thing Jesus said by way of reply to the disciples' questions was, "Be careful that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will lead many astray." That's Matthew 24:4. So the Antichrist will claim to be Christ, the Messiah, and perhaps even God. We know this from Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. So this danger of going astray may also be taken to imply that the Roman destruction of the temple Jesus had just spoken of would not really signal the end. And it didn't because, over 1950 years later, Jesus has not yet returned. So Christ's answer to the disciples' questions follows a dual track, with one track outlining events around the end of the Second Temple, around 70 AD, and the other speaking of still future events at the end of the age, because unbeknownst to the disciples, they were asking two separate questions about two separate eras. So those two narratives have common features because the events of the Roman-Jewish war were typological of the future tribulation period. So Jesus went on to prophesy wars and rumors of wars, and there will be famines, plagues, and earthquakes in various places. That's Matthew 24, verse 6. But all these things are the beginnings of birth pains, is what he said. Matthew 24:8. So, in other words, the wars, earthquakes, plagues, and famines are not the end. These catastrophes signal the beginning of the end, with the wars corresponding to the little horn of Daniel, who conquers three other horns in Daniel 7:8, and the book of Revelation's preliminary tribulations, like the seal judgments, which include war, famine, and earthquakes. And that's found in Revelation chapter 6. Jesus' next significant statement in the discourse was, "Then they will deliver you up to oppression and kill you." That's Matthew 24:9. The version in Luke, the Olivet Discourse in Luke, states, "You will be handed over even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will cause some of you to be put to death." Luke 21:16. So this verse is striking, not only as a prophecy of the martyrdom of most of the apostles around the time of the end of the Second Temple, but because it is also spoken in the context of the end times, implying that at least some of the disciples would be there for the actual end of days. In the next verses of his discourse, Jesus told how many will hate one another and inform on one another. That's Matthew 24, verses 9 to 10. So clearly, Christ was talking about the persecution of the end time saints mentioned by Daniel in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. So the next statement is, "Many false prophets will lead many astray." Matthew 24, verse 11. Again, Christ kept reiterating that the tribulation will be a period in which deception is rife, suggesting that the false prophet of Revelation is merely the most prominent in a slew of false spiritual teachers. So Paul echoed this sentiment, warning that unbelievers will be given a very strong delusion in 2 Thessalonians 2:11. But he who endures to the end will be saved. That's in Matthew 24:13. And that verse is a crucial piece of evidence against the pre-tribulation rapture because Jesus stated that it is those who endure suffering, who endure the tribulation, including the aforementioned persecutions and false prophets, who will be saved. So if the pre-tribulation rapture were to occur, hypothetically, then there would be no need for Jesus' followers to endure to the very end, since they would be taken out of the earth before anything really bad happened that would require endurance to see out. Next came one of Jesus' already proven prophecies, which is that the gospel would be preached to all the nations. So this has only been fulfilled relatively recently. And after that, Jesus said, the end will come, Matthew 24:14. So the interval between advents is for the purpose of giving time for the spread of the gospel and for as many people to be saved as possible. So the most direct reference to the Roman siege and sack of Jerusalem in all three gospel versions of the Olivet Discourse is to be found in Luke 21:20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is at hand. Then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. So the Romans did leave Jerusalem desolate, as the historian Josephus confirmed. So the Christian community of Jerusalem fled the city early enough to escape the sack by the Romans, doubtless because of Jesus' words. So this historical fact undermines the popular scholarly notion that since they describe it, the Gospels must have been written after the burning of the temple in 70 AD, because the Christians in Jerusalem acted on advice contained in the Olivet Discourse before the sack, specifically the version found in Luke. However, that does not mean that only Luke was writing about the Roman Jewish siege. And, so all three synoptic versions of the Olivet Discourse are primarily about eschatological events and secondarily about the Roman Jewish war. Elsewhere in Scripture, Jerusalem is prophesied or implied to be surrounded by armies again in the end times by the Antichrist army. That's found in Joel chapter 3 and Zechariah chapter 14. And then by Jesus' army when he comes to relieve and save the holy city in Zechariah 14. So proof that Luke had end times Jerusalem and not merely 70 AD Jerusalem in view can be found in the verse, Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That's Luke 21:24. So the times of the Gentiles are not yet fulfilled, nor were they fulfilled by 70 AD, because the Gentile-dominated Roman Empire alone had centuries left to run at that time. So Jesus warned, when therefore you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. That's Matthew 24:15. So firstly, this establishes that the abomination, unlike the disasters that came earlier, is the true signal that the end really is nigh. And note that Jesus said standing, implying that this abomination is a blasphemous man, the Antichrist, masquerading as God. Interpretation who is corroborated by Paul, St. Paul, who wrote that the son of perdition will sit in the temple of God pretending to be God. That's 2 Thessalonians 2:4. So the temple was historically left desolate in the Roman Jewish war, being burned down during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and the emperor's son Titus entered the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple, while the temple was on fire. So therefore he was standing in the holy place where he ought not to stand, as Mark's gospel says. And this is another dual prophecy of type and antitype. So there's more on the abomination of desolation and what exactly it means in my videos on Daniel and in my book, God, Mind, Body. So Jesus advised those who are in Judea to flee to the mountains when they see that abomination, for there will be great suffering such as has not been seen from the beginning of the world until now, no, nor ever will be. That's Matthew 24:21. So again, the sack of Jerusalem in 70 AD was horrific. That being said, in subsequent centuries, the world has seen suffering on a larger scale, including, the two world wars. So Jesus here, as he did through John in the Revelation, was talking about destruction of a breadth and intensity we have not yet seen, which is another sign that the end times prophecies foreshadowed by the Roman Jewish war remain as yet unfulfilled, and that the Holy Land, as usual, is at the center of prophecy. So the part about fleeing to the mountains is a prophecy of the Jewish remnant who will flee to a place of refuge in the Mount Seir region of southwest Jordan after witnessing the abomination of desolation. Now, this has been written about in numerous Old Testament prophecies, including, Micah 2:12, Isaiah 63, and Daniel wrote that Edom will be outside of the Antichrist dominion in Daniel chapter 11, and the site of Edom today is in southwestern Jordan. So Jesus proceeded, then if any man tells you, behold, here is the Christ, or there, don't believe it. That's Matthew 24:23. These false Christs and false prophets will perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, the chosen ones. That's Matthew 24:24. So the most prominent false Christ or false Messiah and false prophet will be the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth, which are described in Revelation chapter 13. If therefore they tell you, behold, he is in the wilderness, don't go out. That's Matthew 24:26. It is implied that these false Christs will be a snare before the actual return of Jesus, and that there will be false reports of Jesus' coming intended to lure people outside of their hiding places, their homes, and that there would be a risk of them being lured outside prematurely at a time of continued danger from the Antichrist or maybe from the bold judgments of Revelation. For as the lightning flashes from the east and is seen even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, that is where the vultures gather together. That's Matthew 24:26. Jesus suggested by his lightning metaphor that his return will be visible in the sky from great distances. In some Bibles, the Greek word aetoi is translated as vultures. In others, the word chosen is eagles, which may be more accurate. So by speaking of eagles or vultures, Jesus was referencing Isaiah 34:16 in the context of the eschatological desolation of Edom. Yes, the kites will be gathered there, everyone with her mate. So an extract from the Olivet Discourse in the Gospel of Luke sheds further light on the meaning of this vulture kite eagle imagery. This is Luke chapter 17, verses 30 to 37. It will be the same in the day that the Son of Man is revealed. In that day he will be on the housetop, and his goods in the house, let him not go down to take them away. Let him who is in the field likewise not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to save his life loses it, and whoever loses his life preserves it. I tell you, in that night there will be two people in one bed, one will be taken and the other will be left. They answered, asking him, Where, Lord? He said to them, Where the body is, there the vultures will be gathered together. So let's unpack this a bit. First of all, the day the Son of Man is revealed means the day Jesus actually reappears and is therefore revealed to the world. The implication of the imperative to not hesitate and to remember Lot's wife is that at the moment Jesus appears, those who shrink from him in fear, unwilling to leave behind their worldly possessions, will miss their chance at immortality, whereas those who are saved and ready to be taken, or at least want to be part of the rapture, will be transformed and ascend to meet the Lord in the air. So the latter will thereby lose their old lives in mortal bodies, exchanging them for new lives in eternal bodies, whereas the former group, the group who are, afraid and don't want to leave things behind, will seek to save their flesh and material possessions and thereby die, as all, mortal bodies must die at some point because of the missed opportunity for transformation. So the rapture is the final test of the elect. Now, the elect were mentioned by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, and in Revelation chapter 7, they are described as being 144,000 end times people from the 12 tribes of Israel, sealed on the head by God for a special purpose. So, this is one reason why Jesus said of the man unwilling to leave it all behind then and there to follow him, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for God's kingdom. That's Luke 9:62. So it is imperative during the rapture to not hesitate, but just go with it. And the rapture is immediately preceded by the sounding of the trumpet, which we'll get to later in the Olivet Discourse. The disciples' next question means the question in Luke 17:37 means where exactly will these people who are taken be taken? So Jesus' answer, where the body is, there the vultures will be gathered together, has two meanings. The vultures, which can also be translated eagles, and the kites of Isaiah are all different words or metaphors for the elect who will be gathered together in the air, flying like birds from the four winds of heaven to be with Jesus, who will be the body they will rally around, in that he will manifest in his glorified body at Bozrah in Edom. So God created normal physical laws and he can break them at will. I mean, some people may struggle to believe this part, but I mean, ultimately, God can do what he wants. But immediately after the suffering of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a sound of the trumpet, and they will gather together his chosen ones from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. That's Matthew 24, verses 29 to 31. So the chosen ones will be gathered together from one end of the sky to the other is a literal description of the rapture. This gathering in the sky is the same event as the eagles, kites, and vultures gathering around the body mentioned earlier in the discourse. The rapture is a worldwide regathering in the air because the elect who participate in it are drawn from the 12 tribes of Israel, and we know this from Revelation chapter 7, and the tribes of Israel have been spread across the world for centuries. So post-tribulation dispensationalism is a good fit for Matthew 24, verses 29 to 31, because Jesus prefaced his discussion of the Son of Man's appearance by saying that it will come immediately after the suffering of those days. That is, after the time of earthquakes, wars, famines, and the abomination of desolation and false prophets mentioned earlier in the discourse, which together constitute the bulk of the tribulation period. So the day of the Lord is also described as a day of clouds and thick darkness in Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 15 and 16, and as a unique day with no distinction between day and night until the evening when there will be light. So the simplest way to darken the sun, moon, and stars is by covering them with thick cloud, which will part around the time of evening. So the entire tribulation period of roughly 7 years will not be dark. So the fact the tribes of the earth will mourn when they see Jesus coming is a reference to Zechariah 12:10, in which some end times Jerusalemites mourn the Messiah, who therefore must have died, and look to him for help. So the tribes mentioned by Jesus are therefore the tribes of Israel. The fact Jesus has not yet come with the clouds proves that the preterists are wrong about the Olivet Discourse pertaining solely or mostly to the Roman Jewish War. So the part of the Olivet Discourse about the sounding of the trumpet being associated with Jesus' appearance with the clouds is corroborated by Paul's rapture verses in 1 Corinthians 15, 51 to 52, we will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be changed. So in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to 18, Paul also wrote, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with God's trumpet." And Isaiah 27:13 wrote, in the context of the Messiah's threshing and the gathering of the children of Israel, "It will happen in that day that a great trumpet will be blown, and those who were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and those who were outcasts in the land of Egypt, shall come, and they will worship Yahweh in the holy mountain at Jerusalem." Clearly, therefore, the sounding of the trumpet is associated with the rapture and the return of Jesus occurring on the same 24-hour day as the second coming, just as the trumpet was heard at the moment, immediately before, around the time that Yahweh manifested on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. So an angelic trumpet will not sound for the entire tribulation period of roughly 7 years, and it is when or around the time that the trumpet sounds that Jesus appears and the rapture occurs in the passages I quoted from before, including the Olivet Discourse in Matthew. So thanks for listening, and once again, there is more information, more detail in my book, God, Mind, Body, available from my website, robertensor.com, or you could buy it from Amazon.